imagine in a million years that I would have to bury my child. He took a part of me, part of my heart. I would never be the same.
Family says they took steps to protect their daughter, blocked Carol on social media, changed her phone number several times, let her stay at their home, helped her file a restraining order, even reached out to Carol's family.
A Colleton County jury found Justin Cole Carroll guilty of the 2021 murder of Donasia Holloway. He was sentenced to 60 years, but the circumstances that led to Holloway's death have raised questions surrounding bond referendum and punishment for domestic violence.
Imagine coming home after a good day at the beach. The sun has left your skin warm, your heart is light, and all you want to do is get inside, kick off your shoes, and rest. That's exactly what 22-year-old Donasia Alexis Holloway was thinking on the night of May 22, 2021. Donasia was a young woman from Walterboro, South Carolina. 22 years old. Full of life. Full of plans that hadn't had the chance to play out yet. She had friends who loved her, a family who needed her, and a future that was still being written. That night, she was simply coming home from a beach trip, the kind of ordinary evening that most of us have had 100 times without thinking twice. She pulled her silver Lexus into the parking lot of Forest Point apartment complex. The lot was quiet. Most of her neighbors had already come home for the night. Lights glowed through windows. It looked peaceful. It felt safe. And parked right there in the lot was a police cruiser, the car belonging to an officer who actually lived in the complex. A small comfort, just knowing it was there. But as Donasia drove through that parking lot, something wasn't right. She noticed it almost immediately. A pickup truck had followed her in. It wasn't passing her. It wasn't turning off in a different direction. It was tracking her, moving the same way she moved, following her path through the lot, staying close. Too close. Anyone who has ever felt followed knows that cold, sinking feeling in your chest. That quiet alarm that goes off inside you when something just doesn't feel right. Donasia felt it, and she responded the only way that made sense to her in that moment. She pulled up right next to the police cruiser, parked her car, and locked her doors. She wasn't panicking. She was thinking. She was trying to protect herself. She stayed inside the car. She didn't get out. She didn't run. She just sat there, locked in, parked beside the one thing in that parking lot that was supposed to represent safety, a police vehicle. And then, she did something that no one could have predicted would matter so much later. She picked up her phone and started recording. She had no way of knowing what that video would one day mean to a courtroom, to a jury, to a judge. She was just a young woman trying to document what was happening to her in real time, trying to create a record, maybe hoping someone would see it and come help. That small, quiet decision to press record would end up being the most important thing she ever did. Not because it saved her life. Tragically, it didn't. But because it told the truth about what happened to her, even when she was no longer here to tell it herself. That night, Donasia Holloway's world changed forever. And so did the lives of everyone who loved her. To understand what happened that night in the parking lot of Forest Point, you have to understand the months that came before it. Because this didn't begin on May 22nd. It began much earlier, with a relationship that slowly turned dangerous. Donasia had met Justin Cole Carroll in 2020. He was 24 years old at the time, and he had just been released from prison where he had been serving time for first-degree assault and battery. That background alone tells you something about who he was. But love, or what looks like love, doesn't always come with warnings. And so Donasia and Justin entered a relationship. For a while, maybe it seemed fine. But over time, things changed. Carol's behavior became more controlling, more hostile. The relationship that had started with warmth began to fill with fear. And by January 2021, things had gotten bad enough that Donasia went to the authorities. She reported instances of domestic violence. She told someone what was happening to her. That took courage, real courage. And the system responded. Carol was charged with assault. A judge issued a no-contact order, which is a legal document that tells someone clearly and officially, you are not allowed to go near this person. You cannot call her. You cannot follow her. You cannot show up where she is. Stay away. Carol was also put in jail. But then he was released on bail. And by the spring of 2021, he was free, walking around, moving through the same world as Donasia. The piece of paper that said "stay away" was still in place. But a piece of paper can only do so much. Donasia had tried to move on. She had made it clear to Carol that she was done. She had asked him, more than once, to stop contacting her. She had used every proper channel available to her, law enforcement, the courts, to try and create distance and safety between herself and the man who had hurt her. But Carol didn't stop. On the night she came home from the beach, it was his truck behind her in that parking lot. She recognized it. That's why she didn't just park normally and go inside. That's why she moved toward the police car. That's why she locked her doors. She knew exactly who was following her, and she was afraid. Once she started recording, she spoke directly into the camera. Her voice was calm but serious. She said that Carol had followed her to her apartment. She said she had asked him repeatedly to stop contacting her. And then, looking into that camera, she said something heartbreaking in its simplicity. "This has to stop." 5 words.
A plea.
A boundary. A record of a woman trying desperately to be heard. Minutes after she posted that video, gunshots shattered the quiet of that parking lot. Multiple shots, fired directly into her car from outside. Donasia was struck 4 times, in her head and her neck. The officer who lived in the complex heard the shots, ran outside, and found her there, in the driver's seat of her Lexus, gone. Carol was caught on the security cameras walking toward her car before the shots were fired. Then he got back in his truck and drove away. When something terrible happens, there are always questions. Who did this?
Why?
And most importantly, can we prove it? In the hours after Donasia was found, law enforcement moved quickly. Within the same night, officers located Justin Carroll near a traffic light not far from the scene. They tested his hands for gunshot residue, the microscopic particles that cling to your skin when you fire a weapon. They sat him down and asked him questions. Carroll said he had been in Charleston that evening. He wasn't there, he insisted.
He didn't do anything.
But when investigators pressed him for more details, he stopped talking. He asked for a lawyer. And without a weapon in hand, without enough physical evidence in that moment to hold him, they had to let him go. It must have felt, to everyone who cared about Donasia, like justice was slipping away before it even had a chance to begin. But then came the video. 2 days after the shooting, investigators recovered Donasia's phone and found her Snapchat recording. And when they watched it, everything shifted. There he was, Justin Carroll, captured on camera, approaching her vehicle in the moments before she was killed. Her own words, spoken calmly into that phone, described exactly what was happening. He had followed her home. She had asked him to stop, and she needed it to end. The video was undeniable. But investigators didn't stop there. They noticed that Carroll had shaved his head after the murder, an apparent attempt to change his appearance and make identification harder. But forensic testing told a different story. The gunshot residue found on his right hand connected him physically to the shooting. And his cell phone? It had been completely wiped clean after the murder. That's not something innocent people do. The security camera footage from the parking lot confirmed what the Snapchat video had already shown. Carroll walking toward Donasia's car before the shots rang out. Piece by piece, the evidence came together. Each detail reinforced the others. And together, they built a case that was hard to argue against. What makes this part of the story so powerful is the role that Donasia herself played in solving her own case. She wasn't a detective. She didn't have access to surveillance systems or forensic labs. She was a 22-year-old woman sitting alone in a locked car, afraid for her life. And in that moment, she did the most instinctive human thing she could think of. She hit record, and she told the truth. That truth outlived her. It found its way into a courtroom. It sat in front of a jury. And it spoke for her, long after she no longer could. Carroll was formally charged with murder and brought to trial at Colleton County General Sessions Court in Walterboro, South Carolina, the same town Donasia had called home. Trials are where everything comes together. All the evidence, all the grief, all the questions, they get brought into a room, laid out on a table, and examined by 12 ordinary people who are asked to find the truth. Justin Carroll stood trial for one charge: murder. One count. One name: Donasia Alexis Holloway. The prosecutors from the 14th Circuit Solicitor's Office walked the jury through everything: the timeline of the relationship, the domestic violence reports, the no-contact order that Carroll had violated the night of May 22nd, and every piece of evidence collected afterward. They were methodical and thorough. At the center of it all was that Snapchat video. Prosecutors called it exactly what it was: real-time visual evidence. Here was a woman, in her own words and with her own camera, documenting the presence of her killer in the minutes before he took her life. It wasn't secondhand. It wasn't someone else's interpretation of events. It was Donasia herself, speaking from beyond the grave. The jury also heard about the gunshot residue on Carroll's right hand, the wiped cell phone, the security footage, and the testimony of 16 witnesses over 3 days of court proceedings. Law enforcement officers, forensic analysts, people who knew both Donasia and Carroll, they all took the stand. Each one added another thread to the fabric of evidence being woven in front of the jury. The prosecution also made something very clear: Carroll didn't stumble into that parking lot by accident. He followed her there. He watched where she parked. He approached her car deliberately. He fired 4 shots at a woman who was sitting alone, locked inside a vehicle, parked next to a police cruiser because she was afraid of him. That is not a moment of passion. That is a choice. The defense acknowledged that the two had been in a relationship, but they challenged whether the evidence truly met the legal threshold required to convict someone of murder. In the end, it wasn't enough to create doubt. After 3 days of testimony, after hearing everything laid before them, the jury made their decision.
Guilty.
Guilty of murder. Circuit Court Judge Robert Bonds then handed down the sentence: 60 years in prison. 60 years. For a life taken too soon. For a no-contact order ignored. For a woman who just wanted to come home safely from a day at the beach. The verdict came down in April 2024, nearly 3 years after that night in the parking lot. 3 years of investigation, of legal proceedings, of a family waiting for a system to deliver some measure of justice. And when it finally came, it didn't bring Donasia back. It never could. But it meant that what happened to her had been acknowledged, documented, and answered for. After the verdict, Donasia's family spoke. And what they said deserves to be heard. Her mother, Donasia Holloway, stood before the press with a kind of grief that only a parent who has lost a child can carry. She said what so many families in her position have said before and since: she believed this could have been prevented. Justin Carroll had already hurt her daughter. He had already been arrested. He had already been in front of a judge. And then he was let out on bail. And her daughter paid for that decision with her life. Donasia didn't say it with anger, though she had every right to. She said it like someone who had thought about it every single day since May 22nd, 2021, carefully, clearly, and with a deep sadness. She called for stronger protections. For harsher consequences when people with histories of violent behavior are allowed back out into the world while their victims are still afraid. Donasia's father, Don Holloway, spoke too. He talked about everything his daughter would never get to do now. The years she would never live. The future that was stolen from her on a night that should have ended with her safely inside her apartment, going to sleep after a good day. He acknowledged that the conviction brought a kind of closure to the legal chapter, but he was clear that no verdict could close the deeper wound.
And he was right.
This case became something larger than one family's tragedy. It became a reference point in conversations about how the justice system handles domestic violence, about whether no-contact orders are enough, about whether bail decisions adequately account for the danger someone poses to another person, about whether we as a society take seriously enough the warnings that victims give us before the worst happens. Donasia told people she was scared. She reported it. She went to court. She got a protective order. She did everything right. And she still ended up sitting in a locked car in a parking lot, recording a video because she didn't know what else to do. That video, those final minutes she captured on her phone, changed how investigators built her case. It became a powerful reminder that in a world where so much goes undocumented, Sometimes a person's own instinct to record the truth is the most powerful tool there is. Donasia Alexis Holloway was 22 years old. She had her whole life ahead of her. She didn't get to live it, but she left behind something that mattered, a record, a truth, a case that ended with justice, and a story that continues to push people to ask harder questions and demand better answers. Her name deserves to be remembered, not just for how she died, but for the courage she showed in her final moments, quiet, clear-eyed, pressing record. This has to stop. She was right. It does. Thanks for watching. While you are here, please hit the subscribe button and comment your view on the story and where you're watching from.